Okay, so I thought I would turn to the proverbial horse's mouth here, and we're going to look at Wittgenstein's Blue and Brown books. To people who are right now reading philosophical investigations, I do think the Brown book is probably going to be most aligned with that, where Wittgenstein is laying out how the dictionary with a neutralized visual bias somehow leads us to assume that all words have the same kind of function or the same kind of use, and it's this difficulty that we need to sort of challenge when we look at how many different kinds of uses words have and how different kinds of games can be played with different kinds of words. Rather than talk about the Brown book, I want to just read a little bit of the opening of the Blue book, and I want to try to give this, I guess, my best shot here to try to talk about how something analogous to that dictionary leveling phenomena happens when we start to ask questions about the locality of thought and how thought relates to speech. I'm going to try to read, I guess, for a little while, and hopefully we'll see if I get enough time to say something about all this. This is, again, we're just going to read Wittgenstein. He says, it's good. He says, it's misleading then to talk of thinking as a mental activity. We may say that thinking is essentially an activity of operating with signs. This activity is performed by the hand when we think by writing, by the mouth and larynx when we think by speaking, and if we think by imagining signs or pictures, I can give you no agent that thinks. If then you say that in such cases the mind thinks, I would only draw your attention to the fact that you are using a metaphor, that here the mind is an agent in a different sense from that which the hand can said to be the agent in writing. That itself would be worth many, many discussions. But okay, here he goes on and he says, just get that in there. Okay, he says, if again we talk about the locality where thinking takes place, we have a right to say that this locality is the paper on which we write or the mouth which speaks. If we talk of the head or the brain as the locality of thought, this is using the expression locality of thinking in a different sense. Let us examine what are the reasons for calling the head the place of thinking. It is not our intention to criticize this form of expression or to show that it is not appropriate. What we must do is understand its workings, its grammar. For example, see what relation this grammar has to that of the expression we think with our mouth or we think with a pencil on a piece of paper. Perhaps the main reason why we are so strongly inclined to talk of the head as the locality of our thoughts is this: the existence of the words thinking and thought alongside of the words denoting bodily activities such as writing, speaking, etc., make us look for an activity different from these but analogous to them, corresponding to the word thinking. When words in our ordinary language have prima facie analogous grammars, we are inclined to try to interpret them analogously. That is, we try to make the analogy hold throughout. We say, for example, and he's being critical here, he says, we say, the thought is not the same as the sentence, for an English and a French sentence, which are utterly different, can express the same thought. And he says, and now the sentences are somewhere, we look for a place for the thought. It is as though we looked for the place of the king of which the rules of chess treat, as opposed to the places of the various bits of wood, the kings of the various sets. We say, surely the thought is something, it's not nothing. And all one can answer to this is that the word thought has its use, which is of a totally different kind from the use of the word sentence. Now, does this mean that it is nonsensical to talk of the locality where thought takes place? Certainly not. The phrase has sense if we give it sense. Now, if we say thought takes place in our heads, what is the sense of this phrase soberly understood? I suppose it is that certain physiological processes correspond to our thoughts in such a way that if we know the correspondence, we can, by observing these processes, find the thoughts. But in what sense can the physiological processes be said to correspond to thoughts? And in what sense can we be said to get the thoughts from the observation of the brain? I suppose we imagine the correspondence to have been verified experimentally. Let us imagine an experiment crudely. It consists in looking at the brain while the subject thinks. And now you may think the reason why my experiment is going to go wrong is that, of course, the experimenter gets the thoughts of the subject only indirectly, by being told them, the subject expressing them in some way or other. But I will remove this difficulty by assuming that the subject is at the same time the experimenter who is looking at his own brain, say by means of a mirror. The crudity of this description in no way reduces the force of the argument. Then I ask you, is the subject is the subject slash experimenter observing one thing or two things? Don't say that he is observing one thing both from the inside and from the outside, for this does not remove the difficulty. We will talk of inside and outside later. The subject experimenter is observing a correlation of two phenomena. One of them he perhaps calls the thought. This may consist of a train of images, organic sensations, or on the other hand of the train of the various visual, tactile, and muscular experiences which he has in writing or speaking a sentence. The other experience is one of seeing his brain work. Both of these phenomena could correctly be called expressions of thought, and the question, where is the thought itself, had better, in order to prevent confusion, be rejected as nonsensical. He says, if, however, we do use the expression, the thought takes place in our head, we have given this expression its meaning by describing the experience which would justify the hypothesis that the thought takes place in our heads by describing the experience which we call observing thought in the brain. We easily forget that the word locality is used in many different senses, and that there are many different kinds of statements about a thing which in a particular case, in accordance with general usage, we may call specifications of the locality of the thing. Thus it has been said of visual space that its place is in our head, and I think one has been tempted to say this partly by a grammatical misunderstanding. Okay, I think part of the problem in trying to get at what Wittgenstein is talking about is that we commonly confuse what we're able to do with language with what we think language is about. Language seems to be about things. We often seem to think that language in some way is a system of tools where they're all the same. They're just a bunch of labels for things. And what happens is we end up thinking that thought is a kind of object coexisting along with utterance. We don't seem to see that utterance is there all the way along, and we don't seem to recognize how different words have different kinds of uses, and the different uses themselves are of different orders. I think part of the problem is that people seem to slide in around between different uses, not noticing the very metaphorical nature of language, and not noticing all the different uses of words and the different orders that we would mean if we would try to speak about locality as if it were somehow in a brain state, than the locality as it would unfold discursively in an utterance or in writing or in dance. To try to look at, the even, it was said before, the brain state is very complex for literate people. Words themselves are located in different parts if they have both acoustical and visual memory. At any rate, I hope that was insightful. Thanks.